Before we pick up what I spoke about yesterday, I just want to make a slight remark about what today is. Today is Yom Yerushalayim. If you study what happened in the Six-Day War, it'd be worth studying. There are a lot of lessons there. We had a fellow here a number of years ago from West Point, and he told us that they studied famous battles of the 20th century, and they didn't study the Six-Day War. So he went to his professor and he said, "Why did you omit the Six-Day War?" And he said, "Because we study battles in order to study the strategies that were used, what worked, what didn't work, so we can learn something about how to improve our own warfare. We don't understand how it was possible for the Israeli forces to have won that war in 6 days, so we don't teach it, because we don't understand it." Okay, that was West Point. At the beginning of the war, Jordan wasn't supposed to come in. Israel pleaded with Jordan, "Don't come in so we don't have to fight on 3 fronts at once." But the other Arab nations were putting pressure on Jordan, so Jordan chose an in-between path. They were shooting, but not invading, and it got to a point where Israel said, "We're not going to take it anymore. Either stop, or we're going to respond." And they didn't stop, so they responded by taking the whole West Bank and also taking the city of Jerusalem, which was totally unexpected. Totally unexpected that they would fight, and totally unexpected that they would win. The famous words when they got to the Western Wall, "Hakosel b'yadeinu," the wall's in our hands. People were in shock. The Arabs were also in shock. I was there a week after the war. I spent 9 weeks there, right after the war, and everyone was in shock, including the Arabs. And yet, one thing you learn from this is, you really can't predict what's going to happen. Yeah, sometimes predictions work out, and sometimes they don't work out, and sometimes things happen that are totally unexpected. So people should be a little cautious about making predictions or trusting predictions. You're probably old enough to remember when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And if you look at the 2 months, 3 months up to that move, all the respected news sources, and certainly all the Arab sources, were predicting World War III. If you do that, then it's going to be an assault on the Arab claim to Jerusalem, and they're going to invade from every side. There'll be bombs from every side. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and nothing happened. Nothing. Not one pebble was thrown at anybody. It was complete zero. So when they tell you today, if you do this, they'll come in and they'll attack and so forth and so on, the record with predictions is very poor. This Ramadan that passed a couple of months ago, there were all sorts of predictions. There are going to be uprisings, and Hamas and the others called for the West Bank Arabs to fight and everything else. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing. Zero. So when you read these things, step back and don't, and be calm and cautious, and don't take everything as if it were coming from Sinai. Okay.
Can I ask you a question on
Sure.
that opinion? How do you feel as though your opinion is so great of an outlook on really all of the things that are happening, and even you said last week, or maybe not last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, that what's going on the college campuses is nothing to be concerned about, and I agree with most of the points that you're saying and pretty much everything that you say, but I really just wonder how, because so many other people you talk to, oh my God, it's terrible what's going on, we have to worry about all these things, X, Y, and Z, and I come and listen to you, and none of it.
I try to have a balanced view, and I read on all sides of and I try to take into account the agendas that I just saw a headline just yesterday. Harvard canceled DEI statements for prospective faculty. MIT canceled them a couple of months ago. Now Harvard has canceled them. There's a pushback going on. When you realize that the number of universities that were involved was very small, and the number of students was very small, and you realize that they have an agenda, then you have to know under the table what the agenda is of academia and now the corporate world on this woke stuff. I think that the leftist press has how shall I say, it's partly a propaganda effort, partly to reassure its readers so they'll keep reading them. They always exaggerate in elections the victory of. I was there when on the day of the election in 2016, and I listened to the New York Times. The morning of the election, probability that Trump will be elected was 11%. Wow, the New York Times, they know everything. They're in touch with everybody. They have the best experts, 11%. And he won. So, they have an agenda to exaggerate certain things. And of course, what's sensational captures all the headlines. So I think that that means you have to discount with that kind of thing where it's coming from. I also make mistakes. It's not as if but I think I'm using a wider lens than each of the sources that people look at. They use very narrow lens. I remember when I was a child about 230 years ago, a friend of mine went to Italy, and he said, in Italy, if you want to know what the news is, you buy 5 newspapers, from the left to the center to the right, and you read all of them. What they all agree upon is probably true, only probably. And then when they disagree, you take into account the slant. And that was, 50 years ago, and I thought, boy, thank God I live in America, and not a place like that. That's what it is today. Each one has a line that it's pushing, and each one has its agenda. So you have to know the agenda and discount for it. When you have people, I have a new slogan, if people yell, they don't have anything to say. That's why they're yelling, because they don't have anything to say. Otherwise they'd say it and try to convince somebody. And the other thing is, when you read things, look for footnotes. One of the columnists whom I highly respect, and I read him regularly, is Jeff Jacoby. He's with the Boston Globe, and he's a conservative. He happens to be a religious Jew. But everything he writes is footnoted. So you can check every source on every claim that he makes. So I have checked, and that gives me confidence that he's at least reporting information that's genuine information. What conclusions you draw, you may agree with his conclusions or not, but he puts his reasoning up front, and you can decide whether you agree with the reasoning or not. Others are just yelling a lot. By the way, I'll tell you something which I don't know how you'll take it, but I follow the evolution debates a lot. I remember reading an article by someone maybe 10 years ago, and he said, I'm interested in a certain subject. I don't know what the subject was. I'm interested in this subject, and I'm not trained in the subject. So I really don't have any first-hand information about it. But I need to know about it. So I read what people say, and it's controversial. And I read what people say on both sides, and I look at their, what we would call midos. I look at their character traits. Do they quote the other side? Do they quote the other side respectfully? Do they quote what the other side says? Or do they say, the other side says X, and you, the reader, have to trust whether the other side really said X, or whether they're saying they said X. If someone criticizes somebody that doesn't quote his words, be very suspicious. Why don't I get to look at the other guy's words and make up my mind whether you're interpreting them correctly? But when in the abortion debates, the evolution debates, those who are defending evolution are full of ad hominem attacks. You're prejudiced, you have an agenda, and you're a fool, and you're ignorant, and you're illogical. They call them names. And although there is some of that among the critics of evolution, the vast majority of the critics of evolution is a calm, reasoned argument with footnotes. So I look at them and I say, these people are more trustworthy. Even if I happen to know some of the material myself, but even if you don't know some of the material, you can figure out from the way they present themselves how trustworthy they are. Right? So I think that that's also part of, in Seattle, they had an election for the district attorney. In 2020, they put in a leftist, Soros-funded, progressive attorney. Drug usage went up, homicides went up, assault and battery went, everything went up. So now they had a new one. And by the way, in 2020, he got 77% of the vote. And now he was voted out by someone who's middle of the road, but interested in enforcing the law and cutting down crime and cutting down drug usage, okay? Headline in a leftist publication, Nazi fascist elected to DA in Seattle. Nazi fascist? Really? I mean, hello? He's just not a progressive like you, but then he's a Nazi fascist, for sure. People who do that, who call people names like that, who use that kind of emotive language, aren't trustworthy. And right now, it's much, much more true on the left than it is on the right. You do have it sometimes on the right, but it's much more so on the left, so-called academic left. So I think that makes them much, much less trustworthy. Okay. I don't know if I mentioned this or not, the graduation at Duke, and Palestinian protesters walked out in the middle of the graduation. So every news service but one said, Palestinian protesters walk out with unfurled flags and make a protest in the middle of the Duke graduation, commencement. Okay. One, I think it was the AP, said about 30 students walked out and 7,000 were graduating. Hello? 30 out of 7,000? That's a big deal? If it weren't a Palestinian protest, no one would have even noticed it. But the other news service didn't report the numbers. Why didn't they report the numbers? Because they want you to think it's a big deal. They want you to be impressed. When you hear the numbers, you think, this isn't newsworthy. What do I care what 30 students did out of 7,000? You have to learn how to read. So that's why I'm sharing it with you, because I'm a little bit older and I've gone through these things before. Okay, let's go back to work. We went through several scenarios yesterday, and the point of the scenarios was to show that what you think of, what you care about, your priorities, your values is one thing. That reflects on your character. And then there are the actions that you perform in the world and the effects that they have. And even though your character may be good, the actions themselves may have bad results. And I said that people care about what kind of effects they have on the world. I said that. Now I want to elicit that with another scenario. There's a science fiction story by H.G. Wells, who was a very noted writer in the beginning and mid-20th century. And the story is about a dream machine. Of course, it's science fiction. It's even science fiction today. They hook you up with electrodes to your brain, and they program a sequence, and you dream what they program. And of course, you could ask for something that you would really enjoy. And they're offering it. They're offering it to people. There's only one catch. When they hook you up, you stay hooked up till you die. The rest of your life will be a dream. And the dream will be programmed in such a way that you won't know it's a dream. You'll think it's real. Now, that means you can ask for whatever you want. Climb Mount Everest, find a cure for cancer, be a chess champion, whatever you want, they'll put it into the dream. If continuous success and pleasure would get boring, they can throw in some frustration and some losses and then some efforts and some tremendous success, whatever you want. You can dictate what your own future experiences will be. So here's question number one. If you were offered that choice, would you take it or not? Okay, let's see a show of hands. There are three possible things. Either yes, no, or you don't have an opinion. How many people would take it? How many people would not take it? Okay, it's overwhelming support for not taking it. So now you have to ask, well, clearly if you take it, the amount of enjoyment that you will have in the dream experiences is much greater than the amount of enjoyment that you'll have in your real life. So what is it that's pushing you to refuse the dream machine and to live out your life in the real world?
It's not real.
Okay. This is the intuition that I want. It's not real. That means we want to have a real effect. We don't want to just experience pleasures or emotions or feelings of various kinds. We're not looking at the world as a machine to produce feelings. We're looking at the world as a place to do things that are important, that have a meaning, that have a value, that have an effect. Now, if you find someone who says he would take the machine, I have a secondary question. Let's suppose, this is all science fiction, let's suppose that they do a study of you and they say, we've studied your brain, we've studied your experience, your language, your calculating abilities, you could cure cancer. We'll get universities to fund you and national budgets to fund you. You could cure cancer and rid the whole world of cancer. It'll take 25 years, but you'll be able to do it. And they're going to set you up, and you'll cure cancer. And now along comes the guy with the dream machine and says, listen, I can program the dream machine to give you exactly that dream. Day by day, hour by hour. The real world curing of cancer will have a certain history, certain future for you. I'll provide you with the very same thing in the dream machine, the same feelings, the same experiences, the same emotions, all of it in the dream machine. Equal, identical experience, one in the real world and one in the dream machine. Can you imagine anybody saying, okay, I'll flip a coin? Here, he doesn't get any profit in being the dream machine. Doesn't get any extra pleasure, doesn't get any extra inspiration or excitement. No, it's all the same experiences. But the one case he really cures cancer and people don't have cancer anymore. The other case he just dreams it. And that, under those circumstances, no one would consider for a moment going to the dream machine rather than doing it in the real world. So what this means is that everyone has a pull to do things in the real world. Now, I don't want this to be understood in an exaggerated fashion. I'm not saying it's the only thing you care about. People care about a lot of things. And sometimes this pull to reality is contradicted by worries and fears, and sometimes people deny reality. Sometimes people either mistake or there's something in them they can't accept a certain reality. I just talking to a friend who's dealing with someone who's very difficult. I've been interacting with him for years already. It was very difficult. And one of this person's children said to my friend, you have to understand, he can't lose. He can't lose. In his world, there's no such thing as losing. So he's going to go after you until he wins. He'll go after you for 25 years. Doesn't matter. He can't lose. Can't be done. He can't take that. Okay, so then obviously he's out of touch with reality. But this inner need puts him out of touch with reality. So I hope I'm being realistic. We all have a pull to do things in the real world. And then also we have other psychological features which sometimes contradict that and sometimes cause us to miss what's going on in the world. But no one is indifferent to what happens in the real world. So what I was talking about yesterday, when your character is good, but your actions are not good, the effects are not good, they have a bad effect on the world, and that you'll regret it afterwards. You regret it afterwards because you want to play a constructive role in the real world, and in fact you played a destructive role in the real world. And you care about what happens in the real world, particularly you care about what you do in the real world. So this is part of the background for what we were talking about yesterday. Now, all of this, what I told you yesterday and today, came about because about 25 years ago, we had a representative in Philadelphia. I used to go there regularly to say shiurim for him. And he told me he wants me to speak about, can you be good without God? Now, I'm talking to completely non-religious people. People who have no commitment. Many of them are atheists. Can you be good without God? I thought, golly, that's going to be tough. I mean, these people themselves aren't living with God. What am I going to say? You can't? So I'm saying to everybody in the audience, so you guys are bums because you don't have God in your life. I said, how am I going to be able to communicate with them? And he said, figure it out. So for a while I said, no, I'm not figuring it out. I'm not doing it. But he pushed me so often, I decided to try to do it. And I thought up the scenarios that I told you yesterday. And I used the time machine also, which I've known since my kid. And I put it this way. When you talk about being good, there are two different things that you could talk about. One is having good character, and one is doing good actions. And they aren't the same. Sometimes a good person with good character and good motivation does something that's bad. And sometimes a bad person with bad character and bad motivation does something that's good. I'll illustrate it for you. Poor George is drowning in the river. Fred jumps in and, at some risk to himself, pulls George out. Pulls him out to the dry land, rolls him over, takes his wallet out of his back pocket, and runs. All Fred wants is the wallet with the money. If he could have gotten the money out of George's pocket without saving his life, he'd have let him drown and take the money. But unfortunately for Fred, the only way that he could get the money is to first pull him onto the ground and then take the money out of his pocket. Fred's not a nice guy. Fred's a bum. He's willing to let people die so he can get money. But he saved George's life, didn't he? He saved his life. That was good. Here's a bad person, bad character, bad motivation, doing something good. On the other hand, it's January 2nd in Chicago, and it's sleeting, and the wind chill is minus 15 degrees, and somebody's car is stuck. So Fred coming by, and he happens to be a trained auto mechanic, and he sees those days, what you used to do is you take a white handkerchief and tie it on your radio antenna. There used to be a piece of wire outside your, you can read about it in ancient history books. You tie up the wire, and then people see the white thing, and they stop, and they help you. No one would do that today because they'd be afraid that they'd be either murdered or the car would be stolen and so on and so on. Anyway, so Fred pulls over and he says, what's wrong? He said, I don't know, it stopped working. Doesn't work. I turn it on, nothing happens. Fred said, look, I happen to be a mechanic. Open up the hood, I'll take a look and see if I can help you. Thanks a lot, Fred, you're a great guy. Opens it up, this switch goes here, and this switch goes over there, that cap has to go on this. He rearranges things in there, he says, okay, turn it on. He turns it, and there's a boom! An explosion, and smoke, and fire coming out of the engine, and there's a meltdown. Well, Fred happens to be a mechanic, but he made a couple of mistakes, wiring what to what, and it just, melted down. So here's a good guy, good character, good motivation, who now destroyed the other guy's car. So it's a big difference between good character on the one hand and good actions, where by good actions you mean actions that have good effects on the world. So asking and answering the question, can you be good without God, requires you to split. Do you mean, can you have good actions without God? Do you mean, can you have good character without God? And the first one of those, with the actions, that's what I answered yesterday and today, that in a certain sense, you can't have all your actions be good, not nearly as good as they could be without God, if God really exists, if God really created the universe, if God maintains the existence of the universe, and if God has certain requirements for how you should behave, a lot of what you are doing is going to be objectively bad if you don't know about it. Even if you're not guilty, even if you're not blameworthy, because your character is good, your motivation is good, your values are good, but what you're going to be doing will be objectively bad. So in that sense, assuming that religious teaching is true, you're not going to have good actions in your life, not nearly so many as you could have had, without taking God into account. And that's the way I support what I said yesterday, that the moral here is some investigation as to whether the religious description of the world is correct, is worthwhile, because otherwise, taking a chance that a great part of your life isn't going to be nearly as good as it could possibly be. That was what I wanted to accomplish yesterday and summarizing today. Are we together so far? Okay, now I'd like to answer the other part of the question also. What about good character? Is it possible to have good character without God? I think the answer here is different. And the answer is yes, but it's much harder. Much harder. And therefore it's much rarer. So that if you're just asking the bold question of possibility, the answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that having God is irrelevant to being a good person. It means that it's much harder and much rarer to end up with good character. Now, why is that? Why are you saying that, Gottleib? What makes you think that that's true? Well, let me start with a preliminary question. Does your upbringing, your family life, your education, your society have any effect on being good? Can the training that you receive increase the probability and the amount of being good or not? Some people find that a puzzling question, perhaps a challenging question. Let me see if I can get some leverage here, somewhat unfair leverage, by asking about the opposite side. Because here people's prejudices are very, very strong and consistent. Is it possible for your family experience and your education and your societal situation to influence a person to be evil, to be bad, to do bad things? Oh, here for sure the answer is yes, right? Because you want to be able to forgive people who do things that are wrong on the grounds that they had disadvantages. And you can only forgive them if the disadvantages program them to do things that are bad. So clearly, home life, family life, and environment have an effect on people who do things that are bad. Well, could it be that the environment has an effect on influencing people to be bad, but the environment does not have any effect on influencing people to be good? That's not likely, right? If it has an effect on your actions and on the development of your personality and on the development of your character, it should have an effect both for negative and for positive. So since already you're politically committed to the idea that the environment and the family can hurt a person's moral development, and therefore he's not fully responsible for all the things that he does, and you can excuse him because that's what your politics requires, it must be true that the family and the environment could have an effect to improve the person's actions and character. Okay. So if the environment can do so, let's ask whether the environment is doing so. What kind of strategies are being used to improve character, to influence people to develop good character? There is a myth in democratic societies that education should be value-free, because you want to make room for a variety of cultures and a variety of views, what's important, what's right, what's wrong, and you don't want the schools to take sides in that. So the idea is you can't preach any particular values. It should be value-free. Okay, for students, from K through 12, a great portion of their day is spent in school. Are there classes, studies, clubs for making people into better people, improving people's character? Here's another way you can take it. I mean, there used to be bookstores. You could read about those in the history books, but now you can look on Amazon. Look at self-help. Self-help books. You'll find books to overcome depression and anxiety and envy and addictions of various kinds. How many books are you going to find on how to become virtuous? How to become a good person? When there were bookstores like what's the name? Can't remember anymore. If you look there, you know where you find those? You'll find those in the religious section. That's where you'll find the religion section. But not the self-help section. Self-help section is psychology. Psychology is, if anything, anti-religious. I remember when a high school in Chicago, the debating team won the national tournament of debating. And it turned out that they had gotten information about the questions before the debate, by bribing someone and getting the information. When they were caught and they were interviewed by the press, they said unanimously, "Too bad we got caught. We just didn't play it. We didn't play it right. That was our mistake. We got caught. No regrets whatsoever." They're talking in public. They could do something to save their image. They don't have an image. The image is we win. How do you win? Any way to win. Are you cheating? So what? We're winning. What difference does it make whether we cheat or not? You have a society in which that's taken for granted, let alone that felonies, thefts and destruction up to $950 we won't prosecute. So, just go ahead and steal what you like and then break what you like. The secular society as a whole makes very little effort to influence people to become good people. Contrast that with, now, the religion I know best, obviously, is Judaism, but other religions, I think, also make some effort in this matter. But for example, we, 3 times a day, in the silent prayer, we thump our chests and say, "We have sinned. Please forgive us." We have Rosh Hashanah, 2 days a year, Yom Kippur, 1 day a year, at the end of a 10-day stretch, all day long. We're thinking about where we failed, and we're trying to improve. The 10 days as a whole are called the 10 days of repentance, where you try to pull yourself back from the brink of where you've allowed yourself to wander and to adopt a strategy to improve your character and the actions that you perform. We have books about heroes, and many of them are moral heroes. Those of you who may have studied the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and remember King David as a warrior. He was a warrior. He fought battles. He fought wars indeed. He was a very successful warrior. Ask the average 10-year-old or 12-year-old or 14-year-old, who is King David? He's the author of the book of Psalms. He had certain moral battles and he overcame them. He failed in a certain moral test and he made good of it over years of suffering afterwards. What about the battles? Battles. Yeah, I seem to remember something about battles, but that's not what he's famous for. In academia, where they study it for nationalistic purposes, that's what he's famous for. By us, he's a moral hero. So we spend a lot of time and investment in developing good moral character and influencing good moral actions. If you agree that the environment has some effect on the moral development, you should agree that you're going to have a higher moral performance, both in terms of character and in terms of actions, in a religious society, simply because the society invests in it. This is a long time ago, but I remember, it gives you an illustration. A news item came out about an auto mechanic in Texas. Somebody came in when something was wrong with the car, and he said, I know what it is. It's this. It costs $4. I charge you $1 for my putting it in, $5. Here it is. it'll work. Hundreds of letters came in, this was before email. Hundreds of letters came in congratulating this mechanic because he fixed the car for $5. What's the standard for auto mechanics? Just a little bit above the standard for politicians, which is worse than auto mechanics. The confidence of the United States public in the nationally elected officials is something like 25%. 75% think they're not to be trusted. And you're the one in the ballot box. You could elect different people, yeah, but these are the ones who get elected. So you have a society which puts very little emphasis on developing good moral character and performing good moral actions. Nope, that being the case, you're going to have a much lower percentage of people who are really virtuous. So can you be morally good in the sense of having morally good character without God? It is possible. It is possible, but it's rare. It's rare and difficult to achieve. So I think the overall answer to can you be good without God is if it's actions and the religious story is true, it's going to be a disaster. And if it's talking about character, then you're missing out on a strong societal influence to the development of good character. That's my answer to the question, can you be good without God? Are we together? When you read stories about not only great rabbis, but great individuals, and you see the kinds of standards they have for what they do, the kinds of rules for the behavior that they have, then you see something which is very much out of the ordinary. There's a famous story about one great person. His wife had a pain in her leg, and they went to the doctor together, and the doctor said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Our leg hurts." He wasn't joking. That's the way he experienced it. That's his husband and wife relationship. There was a story, these are a few stories about the importance of truth, which is a general thing to know about our society and its sense of values. Hillel was a great sage in Babylonia, and he came to Israel. It was unknown. And he came into the yeshiva, and there was a question being discussed, and no one had an answer, and Hillel gave an answer, and the head of the yeshiva said, "You're obviously a better scholar than I am. Take over." Yonatan Eibschitz was living in Eibschitz, and there was a yeshiva there, and the head of the yeshiva asked the students a question, told them to think about it. They went home for the day. Next day, they came in, and the head of the yeshiva said, "Well, did you think about it?" And one boy's hand went up, and he said, "Yes. I'll tell you what, I met Rabbi Yonasan in the street, and he asked me what we learned in the yeshiva yesterday. I told him, and he gave me an answer." "Oh," said the teacher, "let me hear his answer." He said, and he tells the answer, and the teacher says, "That's a good answer." Another student hand goes up. "You know something? I don't understand it, but I also met Rabbi Yonasan, and I also asked him, and he gave me a different answer." Well, to make a long story short, Rabbi Yonasan had given a different answer to each student, and all the answers were good. Whereupon, the teacher said, "You should teach and take my place." Did you ever hear about that happen, let's say, in a university? Somebody has a chair, and a new scholar comes up, and he's clearly superior, where the guy with the chair says, "You're obviously much better at this than I am, take my place." Did you ever hear of such a thing? No, you didn't, because it never happened. But I heard of the opposite. When I was doing philosophy, the great man was Willard Van Orman Quine at Harvard, and he was accompanied there also by Nelson Goodman, who was someone I studied with at Harvard. And they trained an up-and-coming whose name was Saul Kripke. But Saul Kripke disagreed with their methodology, disagreed with how they do philosophy. The question came up, shall we appoint Saul Kripke also to the faculty at Harvard? And they said no, because he doesn't do it our way. So he went to Princeton and became one of the 20th century's most important philosophers. But not doing it our way. So, We're going to appoint you here. That's academic scholarship. Another fellow who got his PhD in Jewish studies from Harvard, and his first faculty appointment was at Yale. But they do that usually in most universities. They give you a 3-year appointment, and they decide, shall we give you the tenure that you can stay or not? Halfway through, they said to him, listen, don't even dream of getting tenure here because you practice Judaism. You live the mitzvos. You live up to the commandments. We don't want people like that here. You won't get tenure here. So they didn't give him tenure, and he went back to Harvard and became a professor at Harvard. I mean, I don't think he lost out. Harvard's also a good school, but at Yale they told him straight out, if you keep mitzvos, we don't want you here. That's academia, you know. When I first came, I taught at Johns Hopkins. I first came there. Every year you have graduate students, so you read the applications and you decide whom to accept and whom not to accept. And the chairman said, we just got a letter from a student who was here 3 years ago, graduate student, who wanted to leave absence, and we gave him a promise that whenever he wants to come back, he can come back with his stipend. And now he's applying to come back. So I said, okay. So the chairman said, so now we have to decide what to do. I said, what? Decide what to do? The department gave him a promise that when he wants to come back, he can come back. So you promised him. The chairman looks at me like I'm an imbecile. And he says, yeah, we promised him. Now we have to decide what to do. So, talk about miscommunication. I just took it for granted. If you promised him, you do what you promised. And he thought that was idiotic. Why would you assume that? You should decide, should we keep the promise? Should we keep the promise? Maybe something else is more important. It's an open floor. Let's see what people have to say. That was my first introduction to academic morality. I'm not saying that everything was bad, but a lot was bad. A lot was bad. So, if this is the kind of thing that you're used to, and then you hear a story about Hillel, or Yonasan Eibschitz, or Reb Chaim, who wrote the Haggaras on the Rambam, he was internationally recognized in his lifetime. And there was a gathering in Europe to hear him speak. People came from distances around to hear him speak. And he got up and he started to speak. And in the middle, he stopped and he said, everything I've told you is wrong, and sat down. He realized in the middle it was wrong. So he sat down. Did you ever hear of that happening in academia? Ever? Look, I taught for 10 years at Johns Hopkins. We had people come to read invited papers. Professors from other places, good professors. Sometimes, when they read their papers, a graduate student would ask a question, a sharp question, and then you could measure his reaction. Not once did the professor say, gee, I didn't think of that. I don't know how to answer it on the spot. I'll have to think about it. Not once. They reinterpreted, or they made up excuses, or they changed the subject. Not once did someone say, no, I'm not, I have to think it over again. I could see that they were caught. It's just not part of the culture. It's not part of the culture. Well, what kind of culture is that? So you read about instances like this. Here's another example. This happened in Eretz Israel. There was a yeshiva, and there was a boy in the yeshiva who apparently was having trouble, and he used to disappear at nighttime. So one of the other boys told the head of the yeshiva, this boy takes off at night. It was winter when the report came in, so the Rosh Yeshiva said, when he leaves, let me know right away, and tell me which way he's going. So they did. So the yeshiva ran home to his house, to his own house, and got his overcoat, and met the boy on the street and said, you might be cold, take my coat. Who knows where that boy was going? Who knows what he was going to do? He's going out of the yeshiva, he's not supposed to do that. And the yeshiva says, take my coat, I don't want you to be cold. That's a kind of caring and meeting the person where he is, which you don't hear about in normal educational circumstances. I knew a person who did the following. There was a boy who I guess we would say today had ADHD. This was 30 years ago. He wasn't managing. They took him to a doctor. The doctor said he has this kind of condition. He can't be in school for more than an hour a day. Not more than an hour a day means he's going to end up illiterate. So the parents were in despair. And they took him to Rav Genachowski. Genachowski said, bring the boy to me. So they did. I guess he was 7, 8, something like that. Rav Genachowski said to him, what do you like to do? What game do you like to play? So there's some game with cards or with pebbles or something that he likes to play. Rav Genachowski said, let's play. Sat down on the floor with the kid. And he's playing with him for a half hour. Then he says to the kid, I'm a rabbi. I have to teach in yeshiva. You're a boy. You need to be in school. We can't do this all the time. We can't do this every day. But I'm going to give you something. When you go back to cheder, he's going to go back to cheder. He's going to go back to school. I'm going to give you questions for the boys. You tell them what the questions are. They'll write out their answers. Then you'll bring the answers to me. And then I'll give you prizes for the ones whose answers are good. Wow. He's now king of the class. He's the one who comes from the great rabbi. He's the one who provides the questions. And he's the one who's bringing the prizes for the ones who give good answers. That's all it took. Within a couple of months, he was happy there. He was satisfied there. He wasn't anxious and nervous. He wasn't climbing the walls. And he made it. Because this rabbi, the same rabbi, in the next building over, on the second floor, the parents went out leaving a child asleep, which of course they shouldn't have done. And they locked the door and the child woke up. He's alone and the door is locked. And he's crying. And Rabbi Genachowski heard him. So he goes up to the door and he sees the door is locked. What's he going to do? Well, here's what he did. He got a ladder and he climbed up to the second floor window where the boy could see him and told him stories until the parents came home. Because he's crying. The Jewish child is crying. According to Jewish law, if a child is locked in a room on Shabbos, you can break down the door. The child is frightened. So he sat there, however long it took, for the parents to come home and told the child stories. These are people who think outside the box and whose commitment and caring for people is such that leads them to do things which are really extraordinary. And when these are the stories that we tell each other, these are the stories that we prize and say, look, this is the kind of thing that you should try to imitate. Everybody realizes that if you want to be good at sports, you don't try to do what the Olympic champion does, but you look at the Olympic champion and say, okay, he's doing these 6 moves, I could do 10% of that move, and probably that will help improve me. So we do the same thing. Take something and be just inspired by it, and use that to influence the development of your character and behavior. We have a culture and a society that influences this kind of development. The last example I want to give you is educational. I don't know if you have ever heard of or observed chavrusa learning, but chavrusa learning works like this. Usually there are 2 people who are learning together. They sit opposite one another, looking at the same text. One person reads and explains, and the other person shoots them down. And next day, they switch places. This one reads, and now the other one shoots them down. Okay, what's going on in the mind of the one who's reading? Where can I get shot at? Where am I weak? Where is this not going to make sense? So he learns self-criticism. Because the other guy, who's his friend, is there to find holes in what he's saying. They're sharing a joint effort to find the best understanding that they can. That's not what happens in universities. Each person studies alone. When I taught university, I tried to speak to my graduate students. And I said, listen, wouldn't you do better if you studied together, compared ideas, argued back and forth about what the things mean? And the smartest one said, yes, we would, but we don't want to do it because I'll say an idea, and he'll get my idea, and he'll use it, and he'll get credit for it. But you'll understand the material better. Yeah, but I can't have him to have credit for my idea. I said, how dumb do you think we are? We'll know which one of you thought it up. We know which ones of you are smart, which ones of you aren't smart. Didn't make any difference. When I was in graduate school, I had two friends, non-Jews, and the three of us studied together and compared and contrasted and argued, and we all enjoyed it, and we all benefited from it. But when you have a chavrusa situation, your training in self-criticism is exquisite, and the sense of sharing the effort of coming to the truth means it's a cooperative effort, not a solitary competitive effort. It's an entirely different experience of the exercise of coming to understand things. So I think that the society as a whole has a great deal to offer in terms of its influence in character development and development of values and behavior development, and that's another aspect of how having God has a good influence on the kind of moral life that you lead. Okay?